Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this impromptu Game UX meetup. We had a Game UX meetup at GDC this year in person, and we want to have a online version for those who could not join us at GDC so that everybody could get a chance to ask their questions. The session is recorded and will be later posted on my YouTube channel so that for those who were not able to make it, they can take a look at all the answers. Mike Emitter was not able to join us today. He apologized, but had an emergency, so he could not join us. But we have Alister and Alan who are with us today, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm Celia Hodent. By the way, I have a PhD in psychology. I've been in the game industry for over 15 years in UX jobs, even though when I started, it was not called that way. I started my career at Ubisoft in Paris. Then I moved to Ubisoft Montreal, worked with the playtesting there, more specifically on Rainbow Six. And then I moved to LucasArts in San Francisco, where I became a UX lead. And then I moved to Epic Games in 2013, where I was the director of UX for the studio. And I worked on a lot of different projects, including Fortnite. I left Epic in 2017 and became an independent consultant. I run the Game UX Summit that hopefully we're going to have in person this year in Europe. More about this later if you want. And also leading the Ethical Games Initiative. Joining me today, Alister Lee. Alister, can you introduce yourself, please? Thanks
Yeah.
for being here.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm still waking up, so apologize for my morning voice.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm the UX lead on The Sims 4 currently. I've been in the industry for about, I think I'm hitting my 10 years this year. So it's been a journey. Started off doing mobile games. I feel like everyone has their diligence working in a casino game first and then getting into the game studio. But yeah, I have done a lot in my career doing mobile games, console, PC, worked in all different types of genres. I like to bounce around, but now I get to work in one of my favorite games, The Sims. And then last year I was part of the Game Awards Future Class. So for my work in pronouns for Sims 4. So that was pretty exciting.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you so much for being with us. Even in the morning, yeah, for we're all on the West Coast, so it's 8 a.m. Alan, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm Alan Shen. I am currently the UX manager for a little game called Pokemon Go, working at Niantic. But previously to joining Niantic, I've held all kinds of UX design, game UX design leadership roles at Riot Games, working on 2XKO, the new fighting game that's coming out. Also spent a lot of time at Microsoft working on the Xbox 360 platform and all the dashboard UI for that. But I've also spent quite a bit of time outside of core gaming in gaming adjacent fields, so things like consumer electronics, smart TVs, VR, AR. I think I've just sort of followed a path where it's if there's a space that I'm interested in personally or something that I can learn some new skills or be around people that can teach me something, that's something that's always interested me, and I've always pursued those opportunities. And Niantic is kind of like that next step in the journey for me. But I'm happy to be here. It's early for me, but I'm actually a morning person, so totally good for me.
Yeah, I'm not. So bear with me. All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are going to start with the questions on the Slido because we had so many people wanted to join and some were not able to get a ticket. So I started the Slido so those people could still ask their question and hopefully get them answered live. We have a lot of questions and also a lot of questions that are a bit more advanced. This session is more in priority to help people who are junior in the space, who are students, or want to transition in the game industry for UX roles. So we're gonna favor those questions first, and then we'll get into the more advanced questions. But yeah, if you have questions, please use the Slido. I'm going to put it in the chat again. For now, it's going to be easier to manage. And then if we have time, we can chat in a more relaxed way. But since we have so many people, it was a bit complicated to do that. Just checking. Okay. So let's see. Okay, I'm going to start with this anonymous question. For someone who is not coming from any prior design or game background, what could be a portfolio piece that they can do to get their foot in the game UX role? So, Alan or Alister, do you want to take this one?
I can take this one, yeah. Uh, I think one of the best advice I could give you is just play a lot of games first. I think there's like a part of it where you have to switch from being someone who plays games for fun into an expert in games. So a lot of it is not saying putting the hours in games. It's like being observant, understanding really what uh, I mean, first off, I think game UX is still UX. So I think working on your UX fundamentals first and then leaning into what a game lens is. So like learning more foundationally, like game design mechanics. But I think a good project you could work on is reverse engineering features in games that you play. Like I'm sure there's some games that you probably play right now that frustrates you, like use yourself as a uh, as the audience and say as the player that you're designing for, and then kind of reverse engineering the problem space. And because typically I feel like a UX designer had a big problem, and what you see in the game is the solution that they landed on. And if you were to reverse engineer it, find out what the problem is, and then redesign it the way you want it to do. And then that's like a great personal project you can add in your portfolio as a starting ground.
Can I just
Alan, do you
add,
want to? Yeah,
also,
go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, super quick. I'll add some. So all that stuff is awesome. I totally agree with what Alistair said. I think maybe an adjacent kind of comment I'll say too is that I think folks often come to me asking the same question, and they're always feeling like, yeah, I don't have like gaming in my background. I don't have like the game projects, and is all the work that I've done relevant, right? And I think there's a lot of skills that you develop in applications or experiences that actually are related to gaming that you may not realize. For example, if you work in like e-commerce, for example, and you're designing things like inventories or things to kind of browse collections, there's a lot of those kind of patterns that you see in gaming, right? And so a lot of don't be shy with showing stuff that is in your portfolio that might not be directly gaming related, but think a little bit outside the box and saying, yeah, this is something that a pattern that I see in games, and this is something that somebody who is hiring for a gaming role would be wanting to see, right? And so I look for that, and I always tend to try to find candidates that not only have gaming experience but non-gaming experiences as well, because ultimately you want to have a diversity of opinion experiences on your team when you're building it out. And I think bringing people in who've got a fresh perspective from outside the industry is always super enlightening for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I second all what was said. Play a lot of games, deconstruct, like try to see what is applicable from what you already know from certain games. Yeah, try to redo certain things. Like Alistair was saying, like if you playing a game that you really enjoy and there's a I don't know crafting system in there and you can think of, oh, how can I redo this, if you noted some usability issues, if you do that, just make sure and you put that in your portfolio, just make sure that you say out loud that you don't know what the constraints of the team was, and you're very respectful of their decision, because we never know why certain decisions are made if you're not on the team. Sometimes they wanted to do what you're thinking, but they cannot for whatever reason. So just make sure you state this, because the industry is a very small community, and if you sound as arrogant, like, "Oh, I figured it all out," this is something that does not work very well. I putting in a chat a link, because we have a lot of the same questions every time we do these meetups, and I tried to write a post that was during the pandemic, so I had time because I'm really bad at posting on my blog, and I post a very long blog post on how to get a job in the industry. And there's some of the stuff that was said right now that's already in there. So it's on my website, celiahodent.com, and I have like a blog section. I think it's the second from the top because I'm so bad at writing stuff. There's another anonymous question that is kind of related, although it's a little bit more intense because it says, if you had 12 months of free time to become a game UX designer and start from scratch, what did you do for learning, creating portfolio, and applying for a role? So a lot of the same answers, but I'm a bit worried about the starting from scratch. Because UX design, it takes a while to learn. So if you mean starting from scratch, being a UX designer, I would start by learning ACI, so human computer interaction, and start taking lessons on UX design. So it's coming from human factors, psychology, and engineering. It's coming from cognitive science. It's all about improving people's lives with technology. So there's science behind it that you need to know. You don't need a PhD, of course, but you do need to understand some principles of human perception, attention, memory, all these things, biases, and all that, so that when you apply the design rules that people learn when they become designers, you understand where they're coming from and why they're important. So I don't know what you mean by from scratch. It's a bit yeah, so it's not super clear, but if you mean you have no idea what UX design is about, then it probably is a longer journey than just 12 months, because it takes time and to learn about all this stuff.
Can I offer another perspective too as
Yeah.
well? So I think if I had to interpret it as more of like, okay, maybe you have some UX skills, like some foundation thing, and if you have 12 months to kind of like learn things that might better position you, let's say to getting a job in the industry. I think there's a few things that come to mind, and some of these might be controversial, but they're all kind of useful. But I think the one that strikes me as something I've seen as a trend is that getting familiar or comfortable with game engines sometimes can be super helpful, like specifically Unity and Unreal. I'll throw those two out there, but also anything that you can use to build games with. Depending on the team, depending on the company, UX designers or even UI designers are asked to do some level of manipulation and implementation of UI in the engine. It's not always the case. Like larger teams, they usually have specialists that can help implement UI. But if you're joining a smaller team, definitely it helps to understand at least the engine and what it's capable of, even to prototype ideas, right? Like we all mostly use Figma, things like that, which can do prototyping to a certain degree, but there's limits to every tool. And the more tools you learn, the better you can explore ideas and tell your story, right? So that's something that I would say, at least in the game industry, I've seen a lot more people picking up that skill set of being able to implement and manipulate UI and engine versus outside of the game industry where you might actually have a UX prototyper or front end or client engineer that can help you with that. So I'll put that out there as something that I would spend. If I had 12 months just playing around, I'd love to play in engines and make things and build things in my own experiments.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
love 12
Alistair, yeah,
months
go ahead.
off.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
No. I was like 12 months off. Sounds great. Um, I mean, plus one to everyone was saying here. I think what I would add is there must be a reason like why you picked game UX in the first place. And I think a good way to really, if you don't know where to start, is really identifying like I think the UX spectrum of skills is so wide that it's easy to like focus on one thing first to see if you are actually interested in it. And the second point I'll add to that is really find community because that actually helped me a lot when I was starting out in game UX. It's kind of like similar to what Celia was saying. When I started, game UX wasn't a thing. I think I applied to like visual designer, but it was actually a UI role. But anyway, it was complicated. But I think from finding those roles, I joined a lot of like UX communities and really define like hear what other people's perspective on UX was, and that really helps me define what UX meant to me and what was important to me, and that was really exciting to uh, find that journey for myself. And I think once you find what excites you in UX, I think that is a good, weird to say, but like a North Star to guide you through the UX journey. Because it is, I feel like everlasting. Even being in UX for 10 years now, I feel like I'm still learning. There's like so many things that you could learn now, especially with, technology, what Alan was saying. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. There's a question from Tyler. For UX design, what key aspects have you seen in cover letters, resumes, portfolios that would trigger you to pursue hiring or working with this applicant?
I could start there first. Hey, Tyler. Let's see. The I think the things that have been pretty, I don't know, consistent for me when I look through portfolios, especially, is when I see something that's in somebody's portfolio, a particular project or a piece, I really want to get a sense of, what is the context, what is the role of the person? Like, give me a story, right, around the project and tell me what your role was to develop a solution or explore an idea from beginning to end, right? And what I look for, regardless of your experience or what kind of team is on, I'm kind of looking for that ability to articulate and tell a story, tell me from beginning to end what's going on. I'm more interested in looking for those kinds of nuggets in a portfolio than here's an example of something I did, one project that's sort of done and completely formed, and here's an example of one thing that's like a final bit of UI that was done. I kind of like to see how the sausage is made, so to speak. I want to see the steps. I want to see process is kind of super interesting for me. And if you can hook me in and bring me on a little journey or tell me a little story, I find that is something that draws my attention personally. So that's something I'll just throw out there, something that I've consistently had an eye for over the years.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that. I haven't hired for a while now, but this is definitely, UX design is all about solving problems. So we need to understand what problem you had and how you came about to solve this problem. And so even if I'm just gonna add that and let Alistair add up to it. Even if you hadn't really worked on a project yet and you're doing like student projects or did a self project, make sure that you set the boundaries for yourself. Like say, this is the problem that I was trying to solve. Since it was a student project, this is the assumptions that I made because, I don't know the background or, I don't have the resources to do some field research. And then you make your assumptions, say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. And if I had more resources and I would be on a real team, this is what I would have done. So you can also, say, hey, I'm a student, I don't have all the resources, but this is what I would have done had I been on a real team. So you can also, if you're doing that exercise, you can also explain what you would have done in a real situation. Alistair?
Yeah, I plus one again to everyone. I keep saying plus one, such a Zoom thing. But I think kind of what Celia is saying, it's like there's like that what's that quote? I was like constraints breed creativity. I think that's like so important in design when you have to, I think being a good UX designer is being able to provide your own constraints and then design around it. Because I think in its skill itself, but based on the what I see a lot of that would catches my eye in like reviewing portfolios and such is maybe it's the opposite of how I would approach it, of like people saying that they're a UX designer, but the case studies are more UI driven than UX. I think maybe it's more of a misunderstanding of what game UX is. And I see that a lot in portfolios where I feel like people assume that being game UX, you just show a lot of, UI mockups and all that flashy stuff, which is still important, but I think there's a disconnect oftentimes when I feel like game UX now is such uh, I would say a popular career choice now. I've seen it more popular now, and that maybe it's like a general UX industry thing, but there's like I feel like people tend to lean more UI, lean more UX, or do both. But back to what they're both saying, like being able to solve a problem, being able to like quickly really show up front, being like, this is the problem, this is my solution, and then how I got there is so important because the how I think is what designers should focus more on because that's really what the managers are looking for. And when you are able to craft that storyline, you know, the manager can really we're able to see you as a potential designer on the team and what the gap they're filling on the team. And I think that's like you're really trying to bridge that connection for them. So being able to be clear with your problem state, with your solution is like huge.
Can I add one more thing too that just popped in my head super quick? So this is kind of unusual, but there's been some examples when I've seen portfolios where the candidate actually has walked through a project where in their mind it was perceived as not successful or a failure, actually, but they still went through the entire process, explained the reasoning for why they did things, and it made sense, right? Provided the context, but they weren't afraid to talk about, okay, at the end of the thing, the day, it was kind of like, okay, it didn't land or wasn't successful for reason A, B, or C. But but I appreciate the candor, and I appreciate like being forthcoming with like yeah, not everything lands, not everything is perfect, not everything comes out. That's the nature of the world that we live in. And, frankly, 95% of the work we do might be thrown away or put off to the side, and very little of it that you see that's player facing is representative of all the work that's been done. So that's something that strikes me as like it's not happened very often. A lot of times you don't want to put failures necessarily in your portfolio, but actually I think it caught my eye, right? Those things when those times that has happened, and when I have seen stuff like that in the portfolio, usually the people are talking about the role in it and they provide very good context. And it did, take me on a journey and tell me a story about what happened. So I'll just throw that out there too.
I have seen that a lot too, Alan. Now that you said that. And what I love about those is I would scroll to the bottom to the section. They usually have like what I would have done differently or what I would do next. And that part is so more interesting to me than it's like, oh, you
Yeah,
didn't.
super enlightening.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There are two questions that are not high up, but I think I'm going to ask them now because they are related to, getting it in the industry. So I think we're going to try to go through those questions first, and then we're going to go to the advanced questions, even if they had more advotes for now. Um, there's a question that was very close to the first one that we had. What advice would you give to someone transitioning from the traditional UX role to games UX? So I feel that Alan already answered that question. And Alistair, like play a lot of games, understand those games, and try to see, where you can apply what you did so far into stuff like managing your inventory or crafting system, like anything you can apply it as some bridges. Is there anything, Alan or Alistair, that you wanted to add to answer this question, or you feel that we covered it already?
Um, I think I wrote in the chat, but like I think what it is, game UX is still UX. Like it's really just understanding what UX is. And I think what cool thing about UX is that you can like fundamentally across industries, we're all using the same design frameworks. We're all thinking about the same thing instead of, but in games, we're thinking about the player, right? You have to think about it in the game space, the game lens. And yeah, I always say play a lot of games. It's interesting because the questions I always get is like, do I have to be a hardcore gamer? And I'm always like, what does that mean? Where does that mean like put in the hours? But it goes back to what I was saying. It was like switching from, you just have to be in a mindset of uh, being a casual gamer, as a hobby to a expert in games. And I feel like it's funny because you sort of now play games where you cannot have that mindset, like that expert mindset off. So oftentimes I'm playing a game, even when it's new, I don't want to say judging it, but I'm like already being like, oh, this could have been better. I wonder why this was done this way. And I play a lot of games, with my partner, and he's always just like, why are you like this? You're ruining the experience. So I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't turn it off. So it's like an interesting thing that happens. But going on a tangent, I'm sorry, but throw that
No,
one.
it's a good point. Like you don't need to be a hardcore gamer, but you do need to have a good gaming culture, because the team you're gonna work with don't necessarily have the HCI words or the UX
Yeah.
words, and they're gonna say, well, I envision, we have that game, and they have a crafting system, and we envision it to be like the crafting system in X, Y, or Z game. They're gonna refer to previous games to talk about systems from this previous game, so it's good to have you don't have to know all the games. Like no one knows all the games. It's okay. But know enough of different games from different types of games on mobile, on PC console, just to have an idea of whenever people are going to talk about certain systems. So think about systems, like have a good idea of what this is about. And if you have not, if you are a gamer, but you don't really think of games in terms of game design, like it's a good idea to read some books around game design. So again, on my website, there's a resources page where you see a bunch of resources. So Jesse Shell's book, The Art of a Game Design, is very well known. And there's a Level Up is also a very good book. And there's a bunch of books, like there's also Brenda Mormera's book. Like look at these books and to have an understanding of what it means in terms of game design, rather than just what it means in terms of being a player.
Yeah, I would also plus one kind of using the Zoom content. The plus one of the game understanding UX's and UX game UX's role relative to game design is actually super. That's specific, actually more specific to the game industry as opposed to not. Like when you're coming in the game industry, you're often partnering with a game designer, and so I would say like 85% of maybe the approach and how we look at things between game design and UX and are probably the same, but that last 15-20% maybe is a little bit different that you have to kind of internalize, right? And I feel a lot often the bit of learning that people who are new to the industry, they have to understand what that relationship is like between the UX designer and a game designer. I kind of characterize it a lot of times as that one of the responsibilities of the game UX role is to understand maybe like the intent or the challenge or the even the emotional arc even of what a game designer may be wanting to put in front of a player, like a challenge or accomplishment and so forth. Really internalize that and then provide the different ways, the hows of how you could accomplish that, for a player, right? So you could characterize this by saying like, okay, maybe if it was a banking app, right, you don't want an emotional moment of like frustration or anxiety to be part of that flow. But in a game, that may be entirely appropriate, right? Like you might want to create some kind of flow or an experience where there is these emotions that you wouldn't find right in another experience. And so typically you're not designing for anxiety in a non-gaming app. So, but those are the kind of things that you have to get practice with and understand. And so, and the only, I think Celia mentioned like this idea of like community. I think it's really good to, and like stuff like this. These kind of meetups are really helpful if you're new to the industry. Be a part of these communities. Find your communities. Find people who are in the industry and partner with them. It'd be great if you could find somebody who is like actually a game designer and form some kind of relationship with them to casually say like, hey, let's kind of jam on something. Let's do stuff together and get familiar with the relationship between game design and UX design. And I think that'll be super helpful for you too.
There's a question on resources, so I'm just just gonna answer this one. What free resources would you highly recommend, like courses, project practice, sites, or networking? Again, I have a resources page on my website that lists. I try to list everything. I need to verify if everything is in there. If there's something missing, please let me know so I can add it. But yeah, be part of the network. So you have a bunch of network Discord. For example, you have we can fix it in UI. You have the UI peeps. You have the Grux game research and user experience part of IGDA. So there's a bunch of resources that you have. Of course, the Game UX Summit that I'm running. You have also the GUR Game User Research Summit. So there's a bunch, like we're a very tight community and we try to do our best to bring people on board. And we try to welcome everyone as much as possible, of course. So reach out, participate into the discussion. And yeah, there's also a bunch of resources in terms of online courses. It's not a lot. And UI Peeps do a few courses. Sometimes I run some master classes online. And you have the interaction design. It's it's a bit pricey, but you have it became more pricey over time. But you have some courses around UX. There are some courses around game UX. Is there some other resources that you can think of, Alan or Alistair, that I didn't mention here?
YouTube, there's like
Yeah.
tons of uh, free content, free less like I mean I'm also doing content on game UX now, so this is shameless plug. But I think that's how I started learning about design and learning about trends. I think that's like YouTube is such a great place to I think oftentimes it's like you do spend a lot of your day to day, keeping up with trends, learning new things. And I think YouTube is such a great space to see what other people are talking about in the industry. And yeah, like Celia puts this on YouTube too. So there's just like a whole library of game UX, like a really great space for it. And that I mentioned it was free. Like it's just like I think what cool thing though is I think uh yeah, like Celia was saying, game UX community is very close. And I feel like oftentimes when you meet someone in game UX, we're all always helping each other, always kind of like talking about what we've learned and be like, how can I help you? So it's been yeah, it's been such a great thing. And yeah, I also have a creative strategy guide as well. So I can share it somewhere, but I think that'll be helpful.
Yeah, please do. And you can also share it with me so I can add it into my resources page. That would be awesome.
Thank you.
I forgot
can
to
I
mention
one
the UX
oh, go
Summit at
ahead.
GDC. Sorry, Alan.
Yeah.
It's not always free. That's a problem because access to the Vault is a paid resource. But some talks are every now and then put on YouTube. So you also have a bunch of talks from the UX Summit at GDC. Go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
Yeah, super quick. One more thing about a personal technique I use to kind of find out more about games or the industry and whatever is like often, when I'm playing a game or hear about a game that just strikes me as something that's interesting, I start going down the rabbit hole of researching about the game, about who is the publisher, how is it made, what's the engine that was done. Like you can find all this stuff out and it'll lead you down a path eventually, maybe even to finding was there a team that was working on it, was there, and so forth. And that kind of like find things that are interesting to you that appeal to you from like, oh, this is something from a UX point of view is something I'd love to know how it was done or how it was made or who was involved. And it'll lead you down to a path of like, oh, maybe there's a common thread of an individual or a team, that might have been involved with the games that you tend to like, right? Or games that appeal to you visually. Okay, maybe they're done with a similar kind of technique and engine or and stuff, and that again can give you paths to explore, whether it's searching through YouTube or finding resources to learn about a specific subject. That's actually a really common technique that I'll do. It's like, even just in passing, I just want to know more about a game in particular, and you just start searching, right? And that it's not a specific resource, but it's a technique that I use to kind of like find out more about a specific game. I'm surprised sometimes, like sometimes a game that looks really polished and very thought out UX wise had one or two people working on it maximum, and then there's other games where they have a huge army of people working on it, right? Like a whole team. So I find that super interesting and a fun way to explore about more how game and game UX is done.
Awesome. Thank you. There are two questions around being in academia, so I think we're gonna bring them together and answer them both. The first question is from Christina. Do you think having a PhD instead of a MS in psychology is an advantage on the long run, security, job, salary, etc.? And the second question is, if you're currently still in academia, what opportunities or experiences good to showcase when trying to transition to industry UX? I have a strong background in academia, so I'm just going to start answering. Having a PhD for me was extremely useful, but I had my PhD in France, so I didn't pay anything for it. And so for me, it was completely valuable. And I did not think, I did my PhD in psychology, not thinking that I would transition to games. It was not part of the plan, but I ended up in games. Um, so I would say yes, if you can afford it. So maybe not in the US, it might not be the best way. But for someone in Europe or other countries where you can have free education, I would say yes, especially then you move to the US because even though they don't value the education, they do value PhDs. And so it's for me, definitely it made my job security better. Do you want to add to this?
I can throw a perspective in there, but it may be almost counter to what you're talking about to some degree.
Which is
Like,
totally fine. I
yeah,
think it's
yeah,
really like my own experience and yeah, I don't
exactly,
think you need a PhD for all
for sure.
the for being in
Yeah,
UX, definitely not.
yeah.
But as a career as a whole, if you need
Oh,
to
for
shift
sure.
or things, are going south, it's if you
It's
can
definitely an
have it,
asset. Yeah,
I would do it, but that's
yeah.
just me.
I mean, just to offer another perspective. So, if people look into my background, I have a pretty non-traditional way of how I got into games and game UX. Like, I I have a degree in applied physics, is what my graduated in from school. So nothing to do with games design or anything like that, because there really were no courses around that, honestly. Like when I was at school, I was always interested in games. I never thought I could have a career in it. But I think what I've noticed more recently is you get a much broader spectrum of people who've got, quite advanced degrees coming through and wanting, to apply for jobs, but people who have almost gotten like none, like they don't have really any a lot of post-secondary school education. And then it becomes more about understanding kind of like, okay, what's their experience, what have they done, what their motivations are. And I think as a hiring manager, I always kind of try to keep my mind open to like all the backgrounds of people. Like I said, I want a diverse team personally on my thing, and not only in terms of skill set, but also backgrounds and education. I think it all helps, right? I have found, and maybe so you can comment to this. I think people who are pursuing kind of like jobs or a career through like for games research versus game UX design. I think that the PhD and masters things like that, it does become like more relevant, or you see that kind of more in the applicants, and I think it does have a sizable impact kind of on kind of like your ability to find and land jobs, I think. But from a UX design side of things, I think I see it's all over the place, right? And so I don't preclude, exclude, or include folks specifically because they have a post secondary degree that's advanced or anything like that. But yeah, I just want to offer that as a perspective.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you. But in the research side, it's gonna be if you want to get into UX research, you have to demonstrate you know how to conduct research, and to conduct research, usually you have a higher degree. Again, not necessarily a PhD. To me, the PhD thing is more for job security in the long run. If you want to go out of games later on, if you want to publish stuff, go back to academia, it just offers you more possibilities. So if you can afford it and have the time for it, try it. If it's too much of a strain because it can be very expensive and it's not easy, you need to earn money at some point. Um, do what you can at a personal level. If you have a PhD that is broad enough, later on in life it can help you out. But for a games job, not necessarily. Um, but for UX research in certain cases, it can definitely help you. Alistair, did you want to add anything to this? Or?
Yeah, I agree with both perspectives here. Like, I wouldn't say it was unconventional. I like started doing game UX on the job and then just loved it so much. And now I just do game UX now. But yeah, originally was actually an animation major in school and just yeah, stumbled upon game UX, I guess. That's a weird thing to say, but it's I think the education part is interesting because it really goes back to like being more self-aware of like how you like to learn. Because I think there are some people who like to go the I don't say traditional route, but like the school route, the education route as a way to learn versus like someone who's maybe more, like to self-learn and stuff. And obviously, not everyone have. Yeah, let's see. They were saying that the accessible, education anywhere. But I do feel like they're without getting like such a higher, like a PhD or something. There's still opportunity to learn, like as we were saying earlier, different ways of learning to really show that you can apply those skills into the job. Because I think a lot of times game UX is really I wouldn't say a hard skill job, but a lot of it when you're starting is being able to show that you can do a lot of the deliverables, show that you can understand, the game space. And then a lot of it, I think you do learn on the job are the soft skills part of it. And that I think is also learning on a job, being able to communicate, what is that term? Strategic reasoning, to throw it in there. Like there's a lot of it I think you do learn on the job versus being able to prepare for what you could do. So I feel like I lean both sides, but I see the benefit for both. So
There's one last thing that I forgot to add. If you need a job in a different country than the one you are a citizen of, the more degrees you have, the better, the easier it's going to be to get a visa. So that is also to throw out there. So it really depends on your situation. So first of all, doing a PG is hard, so you need to love doing this. So do you want to do it? Do you have the means to do it? Enough resources to do it? The game industry I don't know a lot of people. Well, in the US, it's easier, I guess. If you're a US citizen, you're gonna more easily find a job in the game industry, or if you're Canadian, there's a lot of jobs in Canada. But in every, when you start to get into higher positions, it's likely that you're gonna have to move around, and sometimes outside of your country. I've been to France, Canada, and the US, so it's all out there, and there's a lot of stuff happening in Europe right now. So it's another door to open if you can. And the opportunities or experience that is good to showcase when transition to industry UX. Again, it's going to depend on what type of jobs. If it's UX research, then it's a much easier bridge from academia to the game industry because you need to conduct research and to show, that you can do that. If you are towards UX design, well, you need to show off that you understand the theories, human factors theories and all that stuff. But for UX design, it's practice. So I completely agree on what Alister and Alan was saying. At the end of the day, what you do is really important. But being able to explain how it works and why, academia will provide you this background. Any other thing you want to add on the academic thing before we move on to another topic? Okay. Trying to see. There's question on the difference between UX design for video games versus UX design for software. I feel we answered that question quite a bit already. There's not that much difference except that in games, we need to be fun and engaging or express some emotions like fear or whatever it is in a game that we don't do for UX for software, where we focus on the job to be done. Games are an art form and they are here to entertain. So I think we can move on unless there's something else that you wanted to add that we didn't say yet. Trying to see. So Jasmine, I was asking, would any of you be willing to share your portfolio so that we can see examples of what real portfolios in the UX gaming industry look like? Back in the day, I tried to do that and to showcase some portfolios. So in the blog post that I shared from my website, celiahodent.com, there are some links to portfolios. I'm not sure they're still very current. But that's a great question. And if any of you would like to share their portfolio, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Blue Sky, and I will add those more recent portfolios to the blog post so that people can take a look. Alan or Alistair, do you have portfolios in mind right now that you would like to share?
I mean, I'll be honest, like my stuff, you can, I do actually have a website that's out there, which was actually set up when I was running my own agency. And so it's set up a little bit differently, right? Basically was trying to pitch more at a higher level. Here are the projects that I've kind of done. And it's not it wasn't tailored the way I would tailor a portfolio if I was looking for an IC role, for example, on a team, an individual contributor role. So I don't know if what I have on my site is a great example for the kind of
Yeah.
for a person that I'm looking at. I'm happy to share it, but if you want me to just put it into the, I don't know, I can just
Yeah,
post it
you
into
can
the
do that.
chat or something like
I
that.
see
People,
that
yeah.
Jason Das is here, and I know that back in the day, I think I shared your portfolio, Jason. So I don't know if you've updated it. You feel free to turn on your camera or unmute if you want to add something, Jason, since I see that you're here, or you can just put it in the chat if you want. Alistair, did you
I
have
was
any?
trying to look at my own. Um, yeah, it hasn't been updated in a while, but it's very similar to Alan. I think as you grow in your career, it's what you show in your portfolio is less so, yeah, like IC work. It's less so how you're able to lead the team, how you're able to think more strategically. So a lot of my work in my portfolio does lean more to like lead designer uh, stuff. But it's like it's interesting looking back though at my portfolio being like whoa, I did a lot of stuff, situation, but also like look at all the cool stuff I've done. I think it's a nice history to look at. But yeah, it's what I have right now is like a lot of Sims stuff and then a lot of mobile game stuff, and then some personal projects. So that's cool.
Awesome. And I see that Jason is here. So if you want to share your portfolio, let me know. I'm gonna grab all those links so that later on I can put them in the YouTube description. I believe, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that back in the day during the pandemic, we did a session that was recorded, where some people were showing off their portfolio. But I might, we did a bunch of sessions like this. I don't remember the ones that were recorded and the ones that were not recorded because we also did non-recorded session to give feedback, provide feedback for people, and we did not want to record that so that it would be more easy and no easier more relaxed thing. But you might find on my YouTube channel, you might find a session where people were showing portfolios. So that might also help. Okay. Oh, and I see Jason's. I'm gonna add this in the links that I'll add for the YouTube description. Awesome. Thank you so much for these resources. Let's see. I'm trying to still find the more entry level questions before we get into more advanced. Um, so there's a question that would Figma plus Unity plus psychology a good combination for becoming a game UX designer to start with? Um, I mean, tools are tools. So if you can know tools, yes. And psychology, yeah, cognitive science is the backbone of UX. So you need to know a little bit of this. Alan or Alistair, is there other tools that you would recommend knowing?
Mm, what was the question again? Sorry.
Oh, Um, is Unity plus Figma plus psychology a good
Oh.
combination to become a game UX designer?
Uh, I would say, I mean, I think it depends on you. I think what I've realized is when you are a UX designer, there's so many parts of like the design process or even uh, like skills or concepts that you can be an expert. What is that? I'm trying to remember that term. I think it may be an engineer term, but it's like what's it called? A T skill, T master. It's something like that, but it's
It's
like
like T-shaped. Is that
T-shaped, yeah.
T-shaped? T-shaped, yeah.
T-shaped something, but it's like yeah, exactly. T-shaped designer. And it's just really identifying like in that, spectrum of a UX designer, like what you want to be an expert in and what you being known for. So I would say like, yes, those could be really amazing for you, but it's like, can you see yourself be an expert in it, be really deep, and be the also like the expert of that specific topic for your team? I think that's how you are able to stand out as well. And being like, as part of like, I think for me, I'm like really into inclusive design and learning all about, accessibility and stuff. So like anything that generally a feature that happens, it always ends up being like, hey, what do you think about this? Let's talk about this. And it's a nice way to show uh, not only like how comfortable you are with being such a high level expert in a topic, but also being the go-to person for maybe your team, or I guess in the industry.
Yeah, I agree. Like personally, I doubled down on on aspects around social systems designs and designing gaming communities and all that stuff is something that I've always felt a passion for. So that was kind of like my core for at least a subject matter expertise. But to go back to the first the original thing, like it's Figma, Unity, what was that, psychology, is that like the
Psychology.
great foundation? It's a great start, right? But I think the right attitude to have is that you're always got to be learning something new. Like you can't be stagnant in like here are the only tools that I will ever use, right? And there's that analogy of if everything, if all you know how to use is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? Like that's not what you want. Like you want to have an attitude where you're always looking at kind of what are the new tools that are available? What can I pick up? What kind of skill set? What kind of things can I learn to help me tell my story better or explore a different idea, right? And so today it is Figma is like the thing, but you wind back 10 years ago, everybody was in Sketch, all right? And you wind 10 years behind that, it might have been InVision or some other thing, right? Or people doing stuff in Illustrator, right? And it's not saying that those tools are bad, but times change, right? And you need to keep up. You need to have the learning mindset and this mindset of always developing yourself. And like again, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I 5 years ago I picked up Unreal Engine for the first time, and then this year I started really doing a lot more stuff in Unity that I'd never done before. Did I know coming into this industry that those are the things that and the tools that would be stuff that I would need day to day? No, but I just always have had the mindset of like being open to trying different things and learning new tools. So I think that's the thing that I would say is there's a lot of great starting points, but that can't be the end of your journey, right? For how you the skills and the tools that you develop over the course of your career.
There's another question from Jasmine. Any tips for UX designers who have been actively applying, but get rejected without a chance at an interview? It's a tough market, especially right now.
Let me can I jump in on this one because I'm one of those people who are I'm a hiring manager right now, and for everybody who's on this chat here has applied for the roles that I've held, and I really appreciate your the time to apply. But I think as anyone who's ever hired or knows, it can be daunting, especially in this economy too. There's a lot of people who are out there, that's looking for positions. The market's rough right now, and it's unfortunately a lot of times we're just not practically able to give specific feedback to people of maybe why they were not, why they were rejected for a particular role. I think for at least me personally, and I'm relatively new to the team at Niantic, is I do insist that the recruiters at least give something back to anybody who's applied. Like it's hard, but I think it's frustrating because I've been on the other side where you send something and then it goes into the ether. You don't receive anything, not even an acknowledgement that was something rejected, let alone was it even received. And that's not great, right? So I think the only advice I can give too is just that I think you need to have an attitude of have some perseverance and resilience. I think that's just going to serve you well, even when you have a job and you're in the industry, and you kind of do work and you're going to get stuff thrown back at you that needs to be changed and updated. You just need to have this kind of resilient mindset. Is super. It'll carry you well in your career. But yeah, I think I'd love to get other people's, Celia and you, Alistair's perspective, but I think it's a particularly challenging market in the last couple of years. It's gotten very soft, and there's a lot of great talent out there that are looking. So the competition is super high these days for roles. So hang in there. I think people who are in the industry, who have positions, and do what you can to kind of amplify openings, vacancies, things like that into networks, and yeah, that's I think the best advice I can give for right now until we can ride this out a bit.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Alan there. There are though, like I think people, like Celia, like what we're doing now, I think we're helping the industry in a different way of like not just like here's a job opportunity, but like what we can do to be here to support you. I think that's huge for the community. I haven't seen that in any other community, which is awesome. There's also like a bunch of people on LinkedIn that actually, I think every Friday they post game jobs. And I feel like the community is helping, and I think it's just being aware that there are people that are helping. So it is hard. Like as Alan's saying, like, yeah, I've been on the other side. I've been ghosted. I've been, verbally offered a job and then nothing happens. So it's like I've been on the other side of it, but um, yeah, yeah, it's like kind of similar to what Alan's saying at the end is just like keep applying. Like you just have to keep going. Like that's if this is something you love and you want to do, you gotta keep doing it. Because I think personal story, but like it was also very similar for me when I wanted to get in the games, but I just didn't know how. I thought I was doing everything right. I was listening to all my mentors' advice, but oftentimes, when you meet with too many people, mentors' advice do get conflicting at times. So you're trying to take what works for you, and then all that. Applying for a job is a full-time job in itself. So it's just being patient with yourself. I think part of it is just like having empathy for yourself as well. Well, it's like if having rejection, too many rejection, maybe take a break, go back to it. I think if this is something you love, you have to really show, the resilience there.
Yeah, just a few things that I want to add to all this. So Kat Craig is the one sharing the UX jobs every Fridays. Sometimes she remembers to add them in the game. So I have a game user experience group on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a good place to get connected and see what's going on. I know that Amir Sadvat is also doing a lot for having all the different kinds of jobs out there. But you have a lot of people who try to help each other out, looking at resumes. It's not necessarily, not everybody is um, uh, uh, what was the term I'm looking for? Morning brain still, it's not completely awake. It's not always very easy to find, let's say that on LinkedIn, who is helping whom, like we're doing this thing. It's a little bit like, because we all have also jobs to do on the side, and we're whenever we can, we try to help, but it's not always very well advertised. So by following some people, being again in those communities that I mentioned, UIPs, we can fix it in the UI. Grux, all that, you will be able to, get help here. Try to find a mentor. You also have organization like IGDA Foundation that can help you out. They have a mentor system. If you are from a marginalized community, there's usually an org that can also help you out. So for example, Corelli Rosario was heading the Puerto Rican game developers community, and they have a mentoring system in there. So usually you will have smaller communities within the community. So it's not necessarily UX related. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is more related to a specific community that can help you out. Kind of have the Game Dev of Color Expo. You have Women in Games. So find your community and try to get help and try to get someone to look at your resume and portfolio to get some specific feedback. So we also sometimes do that with the Game UX Summit. Every time it's online, we have a session, and 1 hour session, and at the beginning and at the end to look at specific resumes that people send out and portfolios. So we try to do that. I'm happy to try to do that more if there's any. I mean, I know there's a need for it. It's just like trying to organize everything is not always easy. But if a lot of you are in need for that, like we can try to make it happen. Another thing I'm going to say that was not mentioned is make sure that your resume is AI bot proof. So now the resumes, most of the time they go through AI bots like ATS. So if you're using fancy fonts or photos or like PDF version is not always working well, be wary of this so that it also can go through the bots so that you're not eliminated in the first batch. Did I forget something? But it's definitely hard. Like this year and the previous year, like we lost a lot of jobs in the game industry. It's being ruthless right now. So of course, UX jobs are impacted just like everywhere else. And I see a lot of people, like my LinkedIn feed is just filled with people just trying to find a job, or people who just got laid off. It's rough out there. So yes, hanging there. It's not easy. Where is my page with the, oh, there it is. Sorry, I was looking at different stuff. Okay, we still have like 20-ish minutes. I have one question is again fairly similar from what we had before, but maybe Alan or Alister, you want to add something? How do game UX and game design differ when creating a personal portfolio? Oh, no, game UX and game design. Okay, so we didn't have that question. How should you highlight that difference from a game design portfolio? So I'm guessing if you're looking for a job in game UX, I'm not sure actually I understand the question. So if you're a game designer, your portfolio is going to be different from game UX. But maybe it's about like a broader question about the difference between game UX roles, UX design and game design. Maybe it's from Anonymous. I don't know who asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think a game designer role is a very different role than a game UX, UX designer role. I think maybe we can double down a little bit on kind of like maybe a little bit of the relationship or even the between game designers and the UX designers. Like I try to think about like it's always is a partnership. I find like when it's between the UX designer and the game designer, and I think it's one thing I have noticed also too is that every game designer obviously is a little bit different. Like they approach things differently, and even the kind of area, the kind of part of the game that's being worked on, you'll have very different approaches to how maybe even the final designs are created. If there's if you're designing like combat systems or something that's like in game, with HUDs and things like that, that's happening real time, that's a very different kind of approach to me sometimes than doing something that's like around the meta game, around like meta systems and progression systems, right, and things like that. So I think that's there can be specialties within that too, right? Like, if we're talking about T-shaped designers too, is like maybe, you really like the idea of things like progression systems and skill trees, like that's the kind of world that you want to live in, then you can specialize there and work with those kind of game designers versus working on things like, the in-game kind of feedback and UX and actions and decisions that need to be made to communicate information, usually at like instantaneously, right? A lot of games that are like real time require that kind of clarity, of like presenting information to players, right? That's very different, right? So, yeah, I'm not quite sure what the original question is, but I think it is something that, especially if you're new coming into the game industry, just understanding the relationship between yourself and a game designer is like it's very important. There's not a one size fits all for that how to build that relationship.
Yeah, I heard I think it was like a metaphor of like, was it like game design is like building a playground and game UX is like making sure the slides are fun. And I forgot what the metaphor was, but it was like an interesting way to like think about the difference, but also how you need each other to make the playground fun. I just probably ruined the metaphor there, but it was like an interesting way to think about like the difference of in the sense of play.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are some things that are, game designers will care to make the game fun, and there are some stuff that they care about. But UX designers are coming with a specific background again, in HCI, and knowing certain elements that can help translate what the game is supposed to be about, with how can players interact with it, and are they able to do the things that they're supposed to do? Can they understand it? And yes, is it engaging? So there are some similarities in there, but I would say the game designer is much more specialized into game systems and game rules, and why we gonna have this system and how does it serve the gameplay. Whereas the UX designer is going to be much more specialized into how does this translate into interaction design, information architecture, and all this stuff, so that players can actually interact with it and understand it and have fun with it. This is how I would explain it. I usually say that the game designer is cares about the why of the rules of the game and the gameplay systems, while the UX designer is more focused on how does that work and what does it look like. But it's also, but there's a lot of overlap, of course. Okay, so let's see. I'm still trying to go through the more entry level questions before getting to. I know some of them are highly upvoted. I'll get to them, but I just want to make sure we go through the entry level first. Um, let's see. Okay, there's a one that I guess um it happens a lot well, it's a bit higher. So let's start with this one from Katie. I'm currently studying game design and initiated to become a game UX researcher. What is your favorite recommendation to help junior researchers stand out? I feel we've already answered this question a bit. Play games, you can analyze games and have a website analyzing those games, as long as you are very respectful of these games, that you explain which framework you're using. Like, for example, you can do a usability review analysis of a game. Just make sure you say, I'm using this framework. And it's I'm very respectful of the game, and I don't know the conscience of the team, and you can go through your analysis here so that you can stand out. Is there any other thing that you can think of to have Katie here? But I think there's a lot that we said already that is applicable
Yeah.
to this.
I mean, I have some examples like in my past history when I was on a team working on interfaces or interface modalities that were novel or new, right? Like I did a lot of work with Connect, for example, if you remember the Connect device, which was a gesture tracking and voice kind of peripheral for the Xbox 360. And I know that at the time I wasn't hiring for the researcher, but I know the research team did hire a lot of more entry level researchers that, at least in maybe in their academic career, had explored novel or different methods for testing or evaluating interfaces that weren't your typical like keyboard, mouse type of thing. Like they were just looking for maybe even people who had some experience or even a mindset of like, how do you test something which is has no like precedent, or something that has like it's new or novel. And again, this is not specifically games related, it's a little more games adjacent. And so you tend to not find that for people who are junior, right? Like people who are maybe a little more experienced would probably have the right mindset and the approach to develop like a new process or a new protocol for testing something that's novel. But depending on the game or the game experience, maybe that team is exploring something like new, right? And would want a way to evaluate that. I imagine it's probably more prevalent in kind of emerging fields, more like the mixed reality, VR, things like that, or where there's just like a novel type of input or something like that. But yeah, I don't know if that's directly applicable, but yeah, I just thought I'd share that because it
Yeah.
was something that came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and be vocal about it. And you choose your the medium that suits you. So it could be writing a blog post, it could be doing a TikTok, whatever, or like game developers are a lot on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. It used to be a lot on Twitter, but that went south. And or you could do YouTube videos or whatever it is, so that you can provide some analysis and do that. That can definitely help you stand out. Alistair, do you want to add anything, or should we move
I think
on?
the one thing I'll add is I think often times demonstrating that you can do the research, but also how you present the research, I think is a huge skill to learn. I think a lot of it is, um, being able to, like, I would say elegantly, but like very succinctly, like demonstrate that you can communicate very dense research into like a very, user friendly, uh, to other people on the team that may not be as in depth with knowledge or with research. And I think that that takes a skill in itself. So like I think there's like two spaces that you can easily work on.
Thanks. And then I'm going to skip the question from Jasmine. Junior UX designer, contract ending in 2 weeks. So I hope you find something. Have any tips on how to get experience or how to dive into the gaming space? I feel we talked a lot about this already. So hopefully you have the answer to your question. So Jason has a question. What are the signs to look for updating your UX/UI case studies? I've shortened it down, presented it, and the story isn't resonating with employers. What then? I feel it's a difficult question to answer without seeing the portfolio. But is there like certain things, Alan or Alistair, in a portfolio that sin is not entirely resonating with you?
I guess the question would be like unsure what resonating means because I
Mm,
think as I read
I'm
that
guessing
as
they
like
didn't land the job. So,
yeah,
but
because I
yeah.
feel like it would be oftentimes would be the whole package that is presented generally and not like maybe the case study itself. Um, yeah, because it's I think a lot of times it's like easy to get uh like really get obsessed with like what is wrong with the case study. I think sometimes it's just the hiring managers that are looking at these, they are looking for maybe something very specific. It may not be you oftentimes, and maybe, the gap that they're trying to fill in the company. But if you feel like, there's something uh, that you can improve on in case study, I think reaching out to like people in the industry, like having them look into it and see, what is it? If you have an inkling that there is something that needs to be improved, I think reaching out to, you know, people in the industry to dive a little deeper. I mean, oftentimes it's like I think it's part of also as a UX designer, we're so used to iterating. I think it's okay to perfectly iterate on the case study as well and um, and really figure out like what works. Because it's not like there's no checkbox to be like, oh, this one looks good. it's literally like you're really reading through a case study to be like, that's a great story. Then we're like, okay, interesting, and less so very black and white.
You're muted, Alan. Alan, you're muted.
There we go. All right. Still learning Zoom after 7 years, whatever. Anyways, I think another thing I would say is like maybe just a different perspective is, you could have like the perfect case study. It's written properly. It's all great, right? There's nothing wrong with it, but maybe take, look around and think about like really your skills and your technique for how you actually present. Like that is something that's always useful to develop and get experience with. Like be really comfortable with presenting your work concisely, clearly, and when people get really good at this, they can actually on the fly tailor. They can read the room, they can read the presenter and start tailoring the way they speak, and in real time maybe focus more on some areas or take a step back in some areas using the same materials, right? And so there are obviously lots of courses, lots of training you can get around just presenting, right? And talking about things that I think can serve you well, regardless of whether it's related to presenting your UX portfolio or anything, right? So I think that's something I would say is something that you can always develop and keep getting better at over the course of your career. And so just it's not about the portfolio itself or the case study or anything like that that you're presenting, but it's just your techniques and how
Mhm.
you present and tell stories, which is something that can always be developed.
Yeah, some of the things when people present their portfolios that I've noticed, it all depends on the context. So it's hard to have a general rule here. But sometimes, when we're asking, okay, why did you make that choice in your designs? And did you think of X, Y, and Z? I've seen some candidates being defensive, where you expect, either to have an explanation of this was considered, but didn't work because X, or it could also be, oh, I didn't consider that, but then you can think on the fly, why, um, what are the constraints it's creating for the user. Or maybe you can say, well, we didn't have too many constraints. We were not able to explore all the things, or this was too costly. But just try to make sure you have a reasoning behind it. Because sometimes if you feel that the person is being defensive, which can be a totally normal way to react when you're in a stressful situation, but it can also give the signal that you might not be ready to discuss with the team. And on the other end, you also do not want to be all, oh yeah, that's amazing. I didn't think of that. You want to make sure that you can defend your design decisions and you can explain why. So sometimes, when we push on why did you do this and not something else, um, and again, sometimes some people can sound arrogant when they ask this question when you're on in the room being interviewed. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but try to always try to tell yourself that this is not personal. They're asking those questions just to test, the solidity of your reasoning and your process. Again, we want to make sure we understand what process you're doing and you're not just having opinions. And sometimes we're going to ask questions to make sure you have the process and not just voicing out opinions, because we yes, you can have an opinion as long as you treated that as an hypothesis and we can actually see how you tested it. So sometimes this what can happen. I'm not sure if this is resonating with people here, but I've seen that happening. Okay. We only have 5 minutes, so I feel we're gonna take just one of the advanced questions. There's a lot from Oscar. Oscar, sorry if we didn't go through your questions, but it was more targeted for junior people to get a job in the industry. Um, okay, is there a question like Alister or Alan in the Q&A that you want to answer more personally, maybe we can do that. We can answer one personal question, like we choose among those, if possible, and the highly rated ones.
I can just answer the first one just super quick. Like the
Yeah.
what was that, the implementation of work that has most surprising. Like I think just in my career, the thing that's been probably the thing that surprised me the most was back on Xbox 360. I was part of a small core of people that developed the achievement system on the Xbox 360, if you recall, and that was the at the time it was like actually very close to getting cut when we were developing the Xbox 360, and it was people didn't think it was going to be a motivation for players to do these collections of badges or things that when you completed the game. And so I think in retrospect it became one of the defining features of Xbox 360, and I think the PlayStation ecosystem adopted trophies as kind of like a counter to it. And so I think that was unexpected for me in the sense that I didn't think it would have the impact that it would. And I think, the fact that even the whole achievement unlocked is now like a meme kind of thing in the industry was something that was surprising to me, right? And so it's definitely positive, right? I'm really happy about it. But yeah, sometimes you can work on things, and even though you feel it's good, it always surprises you that it might have an outsized impact, kind of on where it takes things. So that's the example for me.
Thanks, Alan. Alistair, is there a question specifically that you want to answer?
I could also answer the same one,
Okay.
if you don't mind. I think for me is I think I mentioned before I have an animation background, and one of the things that I think getting into games was like, oh, totally dismiss what I've learned in animation. And then there was part of it when there was something I was designing for a game where we were trying to figure out different levels or different degrees of celebration, and what that meant. And because I was like, wait, I remember learning about this in animation about how do you make something feel, you know, better, best, and even better. And using that concept, applying that into game UX and how you're able to work with animation or like different degrees of celebration in a sense, and then how that rewards the players. And I thought that was such a beautiful moment of like, oh, something I've learned, in my previous life, weird to say, but previous education being like, oh, there is a space where uh but I can be an expert in and really, use that to inspire something new and exciting in the game. I thought that was like really beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was trying to think which one I want to. There's so many really good questions. It's hard, but we need to end the session. I'm gonna pick the what's the UX problem that's already been solved 1,000 times elegantly enough, but that you still come across so often and infuriates you. It's a difficult question because sometimes we solve something, but it's for a specific game or specific players. It's not necessarily gonna work on a different context. But I do see a lot of people really hoping that just like a tutorial text gonna do the job, and just like quickly saying something is gonna work out. And it very rarely works unless this is something already highly known by players. So all the work I work a lot on onboarding for studios, and there's a lot of things that's wishful thinking that, oh, are they gonna get it, or because it's a license, and it's like the 7th edition of the license and people already know the game. Well, yes and no. They haven't played the game for a while, and there's a lot of other games out there, and the mental model of people can change. So don't ever take things for granted. This is just something that I see a lot, things being taken for granted, and trying to reinvent the wheel for stuff that we know works. Like different, like using certain elements to guide players into what is safe, not safe, like using things that have been working in the same genre before. Just you don't need to reinvent the wheel for everything. So just pick and choose where you do want to innovate in your game, because the game is a learning experience, and there's a lot players going to have to learn. And so if everything is new, it's going to be really difficult. And this is how we can innovate by relying on stuff that people already know, so that we can challenge something new outside of these elements. All right, it's 9:30 on my clock, and as much as I want to answer all these questions, we do need to end. We will try our best to have another session, probably late May. And yeah, thank you so much, Alan and Alister, for joining me. We hope that the session was useful to you. We'll do our best to do that more often. Don't hesitate to connect with me and to send suggestions or questions on social media. My social media is LinkedIn and Blue Sky. Stay updated about what's going on with grox.org, gameuxsummit.com. We're going to have hopefully an in-person session in Europe this year at the University of Antwerp. We're still looking for a co-host to take care of the ticketing. So hopefully we can announce that soon. Yeah, stay connected and hanging there. I know it's a really difficult time in the industry, but we hope that you're going to land your dream job soon. Alan, Alistair, do you want to say something to say goodbye?
No, it's great. Thanks again for hosting this. And yeah, I've always enjoyed trying to be as helpful as I can. Except, I feel like I stumbled into this industry, and I want to give everybody a equal chance to try to break in or get into the industry, because it is an incredibly rewarding place to be, and the connections that you establish just stay with you for the rest of your life. It's a small community, tight community, and we're here to help as any way we can.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, last thing I'll say is keep going. Like it shows so much, strength to stay in the industry, but also find a job in the industry. I think it says a lot, and we're always happy to help in any way or form. But yeah, add me on LinkedIn. I'm trying to do more game UX content as well, so I want to be helpful as well. Yeah, as much as I can.
Awesome. And in today's world, solidarity is more important than anything. And it's super important today. So more of this. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. See you around soon. Take care and be safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.